Welcome, my name is Mark Dupuis from Simple Acquisitions, and this is the second video in a series of 5 videos that makes up our in-depth analysis of potential acquisitions. Today's video will be all about exploring the expenses of a potential property acquisition. Be sure to check out the other 4 videos that make up the entire in-depth analysis. You can find them all on our website at www.simpleacquisitions.com. As I've stated before, this analysis is the future view of how the property will perform once we bring in all our changes. We're using numbers that were provided by the vendor, usually from a profit and loss statement or something of that nature. This section is where we often see some creative entries because some owners manage their properties themselves, so they don't have an out-of-pocket expense for that category and therefore don't accommodate for it. We'll have expenses for all categories, allowing us to establish the asset's true value. The data we collect at this stage will help us form the basis for our offering price, so we try and get as much info as possible.
This particular complex was analyzed in the summer of 2013, and at the time the most current data that the owner supplied us was for 2012, so that's what we're going to use. The first item is taxes, and in 2012 these were $11,966. Keep in mind that this, along with all the other expenses, will be thoroughly researched when we move forward. We may find that some of the numbers end up being higher, while others will end up being a little lower than the current landlord is operating at. The next expense we have is insurance. They've reported that being $6,108. The repairs and maintenance is reported at $4,512. The next cell is the general admin, things like paper, pens, cleaning supplies, things needed to maintain the office and laundry room in order to sign up tenants and generally conduct business. They reported an amount of $3,954 under a category called supplies. Sometimes you have to interpret the category they report their numbers under, but you'll find that it's usually pretty close to how we track it here. The next item is for management. And since the current owner manages this complex on his own and didn't have any out-of-pocket expense, he reported 0 for this. This is fairly common to see with smaller apartment owners, some because they don't have the out-of-pocket fee, and some might be trying to create lower expenses for their property. Now, for marketing. In order to continue to attract tenants, there is some advertising that must be done, and they have reported $310 for that expense. This complex has a separate laundry room and office. There will be electricity, phone, and water sewer expenses in order to operate both of those. This owner has reported $20,528 for utilities. This last cell is a great place for us to start, to look for ways to minimize our expenses. Technology exists where individual water meters can be placed on each unit and water can be measured individually, and that cost is passed on to the tenant, eliminating the cost to the landlord altogether. When this is done, it's common for the rental income to remain the same, which greatly affects our net operating income. An important thing to note here is that when we buy any complex, we like to have 2, 3, or even 4 improvements that we can bring to the complex to improve its performance. So we are always thinking of that when we're analyzing any property. The next cell is for contract services. This is where you'll find any third-party contracts that are required to keep the property maintained, usually things like landscaping and pest control. Again, in this case, since the owner is the property manager, he has not reported a number, even though I know for a fact that he does bring in a third-party company to do his pest control. And finally, payroll, which is for the salaries of the people who work in the office. Or, if the complex were big enough, it covers salaries for groundskeepers and the like. I know there was a woman who worked in his office who was a tenant, so I'm not sure if he has a special arrangement with her whereby he gives her reduced rent, but he has not reported any numbers, so that's what I'll key into our spreadsheet, making the total expenses $47,378. Now, let's look at our column for expenses. We want to have a good idea of what our expenses are going to be, and we don't want to spend too much time, especially if this is not a property that we end up buying. So we use what we call our rule of thumb table. This table has what we have found from experience to be the cost to operate apartment complexes. Again, Every one of these will be researched once we get a complex under contract to ensure that we are accurate and we know what we're getting into. Let's start with the taxes. I will usually simply take the amount the owner reported and add 3%, but will quickly pick up the phone and call the county to determine the exact amount and any increases as soon as the property starts to show any promise, especially since these last few years some jurisdictions' property taxes have gone down, so I want to get as accurate of a number as I can. For the remaining categories in our expenses column, you'll notice to the far right there is a range of costs for each category. I'm going to go through each one of these categories now and explain the rationale for each of the costs. Insurance. We've found this ranges between $185 to $250 per unit. This number is based on the location and condition of the property and of course the class of property. This complex is just one block from a commercial area and is in a smaller town, so we'll probably be in the lower range, let's say about $200 per unit, for a total of $7,200. Since the play on this complex is to renovate all the units, we'll try and keep our repairs and maintenance budget to a bare minimum till the construction begins. Once it's completed, theoretically, everything should be newer and require less maintenance, so I'll keep it to our $300 per unit minimum, or $10,800. This is a fairly small complex, and with a third-party property manager in place, the cost for general admin will be kept to a minimum. We'll still have some administrative work to do, but most of that will be performed by myself and Amanda. So I'll key in $125 per unit here for a total of $4,500. One of the big keys to turning a property around is to have good property management. For this complex, once the new rate of $650 per unit is established, and for a complex this size in Kernersville, management companies typically charge 6% of what we take in, for a total management fee of $15,342.72. No matter how good of a product you have, if nobody knows about it, your vacancy rate will be high. We ensure we do the proper advertising and marketing to promote our complexes, and this costs about $100 per unit, or in this case, $3,600. Next are our utilities, which are typically one of the highest expenses a complex will have. An easy target to increase our NOI is to simply sub-meter the water, especially since in this case we are planning on renovating those units. Studies have also shown that when tenants pay their own water, the consumption is diminished by 35%. So we all win in the long run. We still have hydro for the office and for the laundry room, and water for the office and laundry room, and water for the grounds. So if we calculate that each of one of these at $120 a month, that works out to be $10,080 per year. For the moment, the only two things that we'll have in our contract services category will be the pest control and the lawn care. And since this complex is in desperate need of some landscaping, the only thing that will be left once the renovation is done will be to mow the grass. So I'll keep that cost at $250 per door or $9,000. Payroll expenses only need to exist with complexes that have 50 units or more. With a proper property management company in place to do all the signing up of tenants, dealing with maintenance and any other issues that come along, we'll be able to keep our payroll to zero. And finally, capital expenditures. This is our reserve fund. When the time comes to replace the roof or do any kind of major repair, the funds will already be there. We'll set aside $250 per door or another $9,000. These numbers, of course, are automatically transposed into the expenses column. So if we scroll back there, we'll see they are completely populated.
Looking at these numbers, there are a couple of things to note. Our numbers are higher than what was reported by the seller. Although we're going to reduce our utilities by $10,000, we also hire a professional property manager, whereas he was managing the building himself. The other important thing to notice is that the total of all these expenses comes up to $2,023 per unit. On average, it costs about $1,800 a door to operate a C-class apartment complex. So we're a little on the high side at the moment. This gives us some cushion, so I'd leave it there for now. Especially while negotiating, we'll want to show the lowest possible NOI because, as I'm sure you'll all remember, the value of any commercial complex is the NOI divided by the cap rate. So to close out, This is the second section in our in-depth analysis. Join me on the next video where I'll talk about the financing aspect of this complex. If you would like more information or would like to see how you can get involved in one of our opportunities, drop us a line. Our contact info, along with more details and some great educational material, can be found on our website at www.simpleacquisitions.com. Now is a great time to invest in real estate. Don't delay in making your money work harder for you. Remember, real estate doesn't have to be complicated. With Simple Acquisitions, it's smart, secured, and simple. I'd like to thank everyone for joining me today, and I hope to hear from you all soon.